Welcome to our review on drugs. When we're considering drugs in terms of our infection and response topic, then these are chemicals that we can use to treat the symptoms of the disease or to tackle the cause of the disease. The first type of drug that we could have are painkillers. Now, what they actually do is, as the name suggests, they prevent you feeling pain, or they relieve the feelings of pain that you have. Two common examples of these ones that you've probably taken at some point in your life: paracetamol and aspirin. The second type of drug that we could take are antibiotics. So examples of these are things like penicillin, vancomycin, erythromycin, etc. And what they actually do is they're going to kill or prevent the growth of the bacteria. So what we find here, the key difference between the antibiotics and the painkillers is painkillers are just treating symptoms, whereas the antibiotics are going for the cause. They're going to kill the bacteria here. What we find though is that you can't just take one antibiotic and it will take care of every disease under the sun, because what we have to have are different types of antibiotic for the different types of bacteria. So you've got to take the right one for the pathogen that you've got. And the other problem here that we need to remember is that they only work on bacteria. They're not going to be killing viruses or doing anything to a virus. So if you've got the common cold, there is no point in taking an antibiotic because it won't do anything. One of the big problems of our modern lives is the fact that these antibiotics that we've become quite reliant on as a population in order to treat these bacterial diseases, they're now becoming less effective. And the reason for that is that the bacteria that they've been killing have now developed resistance to a significant number of them. So what's happened is those bacteria have undergone mutations that make them resistant to the antibiotic, and therefore it just doesn't work. And there's two examples I've given you some delightful images of as well. Bottom left is an example of MRSA. Okay, so MRSA just stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, a lovely mouthful. And what happens there is it's a common infection in wounds in your skin. And as you can see, that's not a pleasant thing to have. And trust me when I say that's actually one of the nicer pictures. Bottom right, you can see the effect of tuberculosis on your lungs. Now, tuberculosis is again bacterial infection, but we've got some strains of TB that are actually resistant to 7 different antibiotics these days. So we're fast running out of antibiotics that can treat this. And TB is particularly nasty because what it actually does is it pretty much eats away parts of your lung tissue. You can see the little gaps in it there. And quite often what happens there is it will rupture the blood vessels within your lungs, and then you start coughing up blood and so forth. So unpleasant, one to avoid if we can. And the problem we find here is that if you've got an infection with a resistant form of bacteria and you take the antibiotics that aren't going to kill it, then what happens is it's only going to kill those numbers of the bacteria that aren't resistant. Any that have those resistance genes are going to survive, and then they will go on to reproduce. And what we find is then in the overall population, we've got a greater proportion that are resistant to that particular antibiotic. And obviously this just happens over and over again until we've got large numbers of these resistant bacteria present. By this point, you might be sitting there and thinking, what do we do? I mean, we're running out of the actual antibiotics, and if we take the antibiotics, then we're going to make the problem worse. So how do we solve this? And the answer is, there's not one quick fix. What we can do, though, is we can slow down the development of these resistant strains by doctors not prescribing antibiotics for absolutely everything under the sun. There was a point in the past where they just write a prescription for antibiotics just in case you got ill. Those times are done. The other thing you can do as an individual is, if you are ever prescribed an antibiotic for something, finish the whole course. Even if you feel better, don't just think, that's all right, I've only got 4 left, I'm not going to bother taking those. Because that means if there's just a couple of those bacteria left, then you're increasing the chance of resistance occurring in the future. So finish the whole course and don't just push your doctor to prescribe you antibiotics when you don't really need them. We've already mentioned the fact that antibiotics do absolutely nothing for viruses. So what can we do? And the answer is we can develop drugs to kill viruses, but it's not an easy task. And that's because of the way that viruses behave. So if we think back to when we talked about the viral infections, we said that they actually take over the host cells and produce new virus particles within the cell themselves. So if you think about trying to develop a drug to kill those viruses, they're actually inside our body cells, which means that if we've developed a drug to kill them, then it's likely they're going to harm the body cells as well. So this is why the antiviral drugs have quite a few side effects, because it's really difficult to develop those drugs that can kill the virus without harming our body cells as well. Hopefully at the end of this video you can talk about why we use painkillers and antibiotics. You can talk about the fact that antibiotics only work on bacteria, and also the problems that we're now seeing with the whole idea of resistance in bacteria.